Hello again, friends, and thanks for taking time to meet with us again this Tuesday of Holy Week as we continue to reflect upon the final events of Jesus' life leading up to His crucifixion and resurrection. Tuesday of Holy Week is an interesting day because it's a day that Jesus spends primarily in teaching. Tuesday of Holy Week, the teaching of Jesus, that last week of His life, takes up about 2 chapters in the Gospel of Luke. It takes a couple of chapters in Mark's Gospel, which is already a short Gospel. It takes up several chapters in the Gospel of Matthew as well, each of them giving different emphasis in different ways on the teaching of Jesus that last week before He was crucified. It's possible that Jesus spent much of the week teaching and that much of His teaching is compiled here into this, but it's also not altogether impossible to think or to imagine Jesus doing all of this teaching in one day on that Tuesday of Holy Week. What we learn from these passages in these Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, today we'll be looking specifically at Luke chapter 20 and 21, is that Jesus is the Son of God who comes to teach with authority and with power that divides the listeners of His teaching, the audience of His teaching. It divides them along the lines of faith. On the one hand, those that believe and receive Him, and on the other hand, those who continue to reject Him. Well, look with me, would you, at the first of the parables that Jesus tells on that final week of His life. Luke chapter 20, beginning in verse 9, we read this, that Jesus began to tell the people this parable. A man planted a vineyard and let it out. He leased it out to tenants and went into another country for a long while. When the time came, he sent a servant to those tenants so that they could give him some of the fruit of the vineyard. But the tenants beat him, and they sent him away empty-handed. And he sent another servant, but they also beat him and treated him shamefully, and sent him away empty-handed. And he sent yet a third. This one they also wounded and cast out. Then the owner of the vineyard said, "What shall I do? I will send my beloved son. Perhaps they will respect him." But when the tenants saw the son, they said to themselves, "This is the heir. Let us kill him so that the inheritance may be ours." And they threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. "What then," asked Jesus, "will the owner of the vineyard do to them?" "He will come and destroy those tenants and give the vineyard to others." And when they heard this, they said, "Surely not." But he looked directly at them being the Pharisees, the scribes, those religious leaders of the day. And he said, "What then is this that is written? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Everyone who falls on that stone will be broken to pieces, and when it falls on anyone, it will crush him." It's quite a way to start the teaching session of one of the last days of your life, isn't it? To confront the religious leaders, religious rulers of the day, to say you have been an abuse to not only the people of God, but to the servants of God that have been sent by God to care for His people. In this parable, the man who owns the vineyard represents God. The tenants, those that the vineyard is leased out to, represent the scribes and Pharisees and Sadducees, the chief priests, the religious leaders of the day. The servants of the man that are sent to collect the fruit of the vineyard symbolize or represent prophets and others that have come to bring correction to God's people and to their leaders. And the Son is, of course, the only Son of God, Jesus. The parable that Jesus here tells is very clear about who He is and what His purpose is on earth. The parable is very clear, and we know that it's very clear even to the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the priests and the scribes that are listening to it. We know that it's clear even to them that Jesus is saying, "I am the Son. I'm the one that God has sent, that the Father has sent to collect His people, to care for His people, to bring to the Father what is rightfully His and who are rightfully His. And you," He is saying to the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes, "you are just the next in a long line of religious leaders that have rejected God's prophets. that have rejected and harmed and placed burdens upon God's people that they could never hope to be relieved of on their own. The Pharisees and the Sadducees, those that are listening to Jesus as He's teaching this parable, are offended by it. They are scandalized by it. They think and respond to Jesus by saying, there's no way that God would reject us as His leaders. There's no way that God would take away what we have been given in our responsibility for His people. There's no way, Jesus, that your parable is true. This is baloney. This is garbage. Get out of here. Jesus says to their frustration, He says, what is this then that is written? And He cites from Psalm 118, verse 22, saying, the stone that the builders rejected has now become the cornerstone. The Son that the tenants rejected has become the King of glory, Jesus is saying. He is here speaking about Himself, saying, I am, though you have rejected me as the Son of God, I am the chief cornerstone. I am that first block of the foundation of the people of God upon which the church, the people of God for all time will be built on. It was rejected by those who should have received it as a stone for its proper use this way. But it is received by those and built upon by those who have faith in God and who desire to be in relationship with Him. Over the course of the next two chapters, Luke chapter 20 and 21, Jesus will teach with power and teach convictionally, like He does here in this parable, about many sorts of issues. Paying taxes to Caesar, issues about the resurrection. He'll teach about being cautious of the scribes and Pharisees that lay up expectations for the people of God that they themselves aren't willing to live up to. He'll teach about what true generosity and trust in the provision of God looks like. And then He'll even foretell the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem that will take place some 40 years after He foretells it. And He'll even prophesy about the end of the world and the coming judgment of all mankind. Now, there's a lot of details that we could get into in all of this, and I'll let you do that on your own in your study of God's Word over the course of the week. But here is the main thing, the big idea that I want for us to draw out of Luke 20 and 21, the final teaching of Jesus, is this: that Jesus, as the Son of God, teaches with power and authority. And He teaches in a way that cannot be ignored but must be responded to. And just like in that parable, there are one of two different ways to respond. As those who are confronted with the reality that Jesus is the Son of God, the coming King into the world, we can either receive Him as God's Son, a cornerstone upon which to build our lives, or we can reject Him as a lunatic. We can reject Him as a heretic. We can reject Him as a liar and see Him not as a stone to build our lives upon, but see Him as a hurdle, as an obstacle to overcome. Jesus, in this last week of His life, minces no words. He cuts right to the heart of the matter. He gets straight to the issue that all of us have and must face in life, whether to believe that He is the Son of God who gives His life for sin, or to reject His teaching altogether. He puts the matter to us in His final teaching in Luke 20 and 21 with power, with authority, with a way that no one can ignore and just walk away from, assuming that they can maybe deal with Jesus later on down the road or somehow ignore dealing with Him altogether. For those who are faithful followers of Jesus, for those who are ready to follow Him every day of their life, even among the audience that is listening to Him teach on that last Tuesday of His life, Jesus does not leave them, even as He's foretelling the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem and speaking about the coming judgment of all humanity and of all the world. He does not leave those who are faithful to God without hope and without peace, without a word of comfort. For even as He teaches about God coming and purifying, cleansing this world and making this world new, removing the heavens and the earth and replacing them, rebuilding them as an eternal dwelling for the people of God, Jesus says this in Luke 21:33. He says, heaven and earth will pass away, right? This world is coming to an end. But listen, my words will not pass away. My words will not pass away. The great British preacher, Charles Spurgeon, said, "Where the king is, there is great power. But where God is, there is infinite, there is eternal power." Jesus is the Son of God, the only divine God-man, fully God, fully human, God in flesh, who comes not only to be a good teacher, an incisive teacher, a teacher that leads us to make a decision about who He is and how we'll live our lives in relationship to Him, but He's also the only God who speaks the words of God. He's the only Son of God who speaks with power and authority as God. And as such, it is His words that will never pass away. It's His words that will live forever. It is the truth that proceeds from the mouth of Christ that will never pass away. So then on this Tuesday of Holy Week, as we see this clear, incisive, pointed teaching of Jesus, how is it that we have responded to Him? Have we responded to Him as that cornerstone upon which to build our lives? Trusting in Him, placing faith in Him, depending upon Him for all things? Or have we approached Jesus as an obstacle, as a hurdle to overcome? Those are really the only two options for dealing with Jesus, for responding to Him. And we see Him speak in very clear terms about the fate of those who build their lives upon Him, leading to life everlasting in His presence, and the fate of those who reject Him, who see Him as a stone to hurdle over, as an obstacle to be avoided. Friend, my hope and prayer for each of us as we spend time here together reflecting on who this Jesus is, as we approach the day of His crucifixion for sins and His resurrection, that we might be made right with God. My hope and prayer for all of us is that we can say with confidence that Christ is the cornerstone of my life. His Word is the foundation of my faith, and it is a firm foundation that I have built my life upon. I believe that He's the Son of God. I believe He was raised from the dead, and I am living my life in love and obedience to Him. Heaven and earth shall pass away, Jesus says, in the power of God as the Son of God, but my words will never pass away. They are a firm foundation. As Jesus speaks about Himself being the cornerstone upon which to build our lives, speaking about His words as being those which will never change, which will never falter or fail, I'm reminded of the great hymn, How Firm a Foundation, and the final verse of that hymn, which goes this way: "The soul that on Jesus hath leaned for repose, I will not desert to his foes. That soul, though all hell should endeavor to shake, I'll never, no never, no never forsake." This Tuesday approaching Good Friday and Easter Sunday, it is good to remember that though heaven and earth pass away, the words of Jesus will never pass away. That Jesus, the Son of God, who died for our sins, was raised from the dead and rules and reigns over the cosmos even now. He is the cornerstone of the church and the cornerstone of the life of every person who trusts and leans upon Him, and He will never, no never, no never forsake the one who trusts in Him. Dear friend, I pray that that is true of you. I pray that you have given your life in faith and trust to Jesus as Lord and King, and that you are faithfully, day by day, moment by moment, building your life on Him, the cornerstone. God bless you this evening. I look forward to meeting with you again here tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. as we continue our walk through Holy Week and the last days of Jesus' life.